In July 2010, a team of forensic specialists gathered at a cemetery in Bucharest, Romania. They had come to open 2 coffins. Inside those coffins, buried for 21 years, were supposed to be the remains of Nicolae and Elena Ceausescu, the couple who had ruled Romania with absolute power for nearly a quarter century. The couple who had been dragged before a 2-hour military tribunal on Christmas Day 1989 and shot by firing squad before the sun went down. But here's the problem. For 21 years, millions of Romanians weren't sure the bodies in those coffins were actually theirs. The execution footage had been grainy. The burial had been rushed. The coffins had been placed in the ground with almost no formal identification. And the people who organized the entire trial and execution, the people who took power the moment the Ceausescus were dead, had very specific reasons to want this done quickly and quietly. So when forensic investigators finally opened Elena Ceausescu's coffin 2 decades later, what they found raised more questions than it answered. And the full story of who Elena Ceausescu actually was. The fake scientist, the real power behind the regime, the woman who screamed at her executioners until the moment they fired, is something most people outside Romania have never fully heard. Until now. If stories like this, real history, told completely and without sanitizing, are what you come here for, subscribe to Timelines of War right now and turn on notifications. Every detail in this video is documented and real, and what you're about to hear about Elena Ceausescu will stay with you. Let's start from the beginning. To understand Elena Ceausescu, you first need to understand the Romania she and her husband built, because the country they created was the context that made everything about her possible. Romania in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s was a suffocating place. The Romanian Communist Party controlled absolutely everything: the press, education, religious practice, cultural life, and above all, people. Their movements, their conversations, their private thoughts, as best as any government has ever managed to monitor private thoughts. The regime's secret police, the Securitate, was considered one of the most extensive and brutal intelligence organizations in the entire Eastern Bloc. To understand the scale of what they built, estimates suggest the Securitate maintained between 400,000 and 500,000 informants across a population of 22 million people. One informant for approximately every 45 citizens, your neighbors, your co-workers, your friends, in many documented cases, members of your own family, all potentially reporting your movements, your conversations, your expressed opinions to a security apparatus that had the power to make you disappear without explanation. Nicolae Ceausescu had come to power in 1965 following the death of his predecessor. In the beginning, he cultivated an image of relative moderation. He publicly criticized the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968, a position that earned him genuine praise from Western governments and a handshake with President Richard Nixon. He seemed briefly like the communist who might actually be different. He wasn't. Through the 1970s, the regime became progressively more personal, more centered on the cult of personality surrounding Nicolae, and increasingly on Elena as well. By the 1980s, Romania had transformed from a merely authoritarian state into something approaching a personality cult of almost North Korean intensity. And at the center of that cult, presented to the Romanian people as a brilliant scientist, a loving mother of the nation, and a symbol of female achievement under socialism, stood Elena Ceausescu. The reality was almost the precise opposite of everything the propaganda claimed. Elena Ceausescu was born in a small village called Petresti in southern Romania. The exact year of her birth remains in dispute. Official regime documents listed 1916, while more recent records suggest 1919. Even this basic biographical detail was subject to manipulation. She came from a poor peasant family. Her formal education ended after approximately 4 years of primary school. She left as a child with minimal literacy and no academic foundation of any kind. This is the starting point for one of the most audacious frauds in the history of any modern government. Over the following decades, Elena Ceausescu accumulated an extraordinary portfolio of academic credentials: a degree in chemistry, a doctorate, multiple scientific awards, honorary membership in scientific academies in Britain, the United States, Argentina, and other countries. Publications bearing her name appeared in scientific journals. She was presented internationally as a chemist of genuine distinction, a researcher making meaningful contributions to her field. Every single credential was fabricated. Post-regime investigations established this with complete clarity. The scientists who signed documents with Elena's name, who attached their institution's credibility to her supposed achievements, who published papers under her authorship, all of them did so under coercion. They understood that refusing meant labor camps, or worse, An entire country's academic establishment maintained a lie for decades because telling the truth about Elena Ceausescu's non-existent qualifications was potentially fatal. Meanwhile, the woman at the center of this fraud appeared on Romanian state television wearing expensive jewelry and discussing the great scientific advances she was leading. While the Romanian people she supposedly served stood in hours, long queues for basic food. The distance between the performance and the reality was total, and it was maintained entirely through terror. By the 1980s, Romania was in economic freefall, and the Ceausescus were directly responsible. Nicolae made what historians now describe as one of the most catastrophically misguided economic decisions of any post-war European government. He decided to pay off Romania's entire foreign debt in a single sustained effort. The concept sounds reasonable in isolation. The implementation was a humanitarian disaster. To generate the foreign currency needed, Romania exported virtually everything it produced. Energy, consumer goods, industrial output, all of it sent abroad while the Romanian people received what remained after export quotas were filled, which was frequently almost nothing. Meat was rationed, bread was rationed. In the middle of European winters, residential heating was cut or reduced to levels incompatible with basic comfort. Hospitals operated without adequate medications. Power outages became routine. Grocery shelves that should have held food held empty space. And Elena Ceausescu appeared on state television in diamonds and pearls, discussing scientific achievements that existed only in fabricated documents, while Romanians stood in lines that stretched around city blocks for a loaf of bread. The Securitate maintained surveillance and suppression across this deteriorating country with undiminished brutality. Estimates suggest more than 200,000 people were imprisoned for political reasons during the regime's full duration. Thousands died in detention under conditions designed to destroy rather than incarcerate. By 1989, something had been building in Romania for years that no amount of surveillance could fully suppress. The recognition, spreading quietly through a population accustomed to monitoring its own expressions, that this could not continue indefinitely. In December 1989, it stopped continuing. It began in Timisoara in western Romania, sparked by something that might have seemed manageable to a regime accustomed to suppressing dissent. A Protestant pastor named Nicolae Ceausescu had been preaching against the government. The regime attempted to remove him from his parish. His congregation formed a human barrier around his home to protect him. Others joined them. What had begun as a small religious demonstration became a popular uprising within days. The Securitate opened fire on protesters. The precise death toll from those early days in Timisoara has never been definitively established, but accounts from the time documented dozens killed in the streets. And instead of crushing the movement, as similar violence had done at earlier points in the regime's history, the killings accelerated it. The news spread through a country where everyone had been waiting, without fully admitting they were waiting, for exactly this moment. On December 21, Nicolae Ceausescu made what historians now consider one of the most catastrophic miscalculations of his entire political career. He called a rally in Bucharest, massive, organized, with hundreds of thousands of people brought from across the city to fill the square and demonstrate public support for the regime. This had worked before. It had always worked before. Standing on the balcony of the Central Committee building, broadcasting live on state television, Nicolae Ceausescu began to speak. The crowd began to boo. Not scattered, isolated voices. A wave of sound that built from the edges of the enormous crowd and moved inward, growing louder, until it became something that could not be talked over or managed or explained away. The cameras tried to cut the transmission. It was too late. The image had already gone out across Romania, and across the world, of Nicolae Ceausescu standing on his balcony with an expression of pure, uncomprehending shock as the people he had ruled for 24 years told him exactly what they thought of him. That night, Bucharest descended into chaos, street confrontations, gunfire, fires visible across the city. On December 22, the Romanian military announced it was siding with the people, and Elena and Nicolae Ceausescu fled. What happened next has the quality of something scripted for maximum humiliation, except it was entirely real. The Ceausescus escaped from the roof of the Central Committee building by helicopter while protesters were already inside the building below them. The pilot, operating under enormous pressure as Romanian airspace was being closed, landed the helicopter on a highway outside Bucharest, rather than attempting to reach any secure destination. From the highway, the couple transferred to a car. The car eventually brought them to a police station in the city of Târgu, and there, in a facility entirely unprepared for what it was now holding, Nicolae and Elena Ceausescu sat under military guard and waited. They didn't know exactly what was coming, but they found out quickly. Christmas Day 1989, a military base in Târgovițe. What the new Romanian authorities called a trial lasted less than 2 hours. Elena and Nicolae were brought before an emergency military tribunal in an improvised courtroom. There was no independent defense in any meaningful sense. No systematic gathering of evidence. No procedural protections that would have been recognized by any international legal standard. The charges were genocide, subversion of state power, damage to the national economy. And this is where the documented footage becomes extraordinary, because the trial was filmed, and portions of that footage survived. You can watch Nicolae Ceausescu, the man who had been absolute master of an entire country for nearly a quarter century, refuse to recognize the tribunal's authority. He repeats that the proceedings are illegitimate, that only the Romanian parliament has the authority to try him. His voice carries the genuine bafflement of someone who has spent so long operating without any accountability that the concept of being held accountable has become genuinely incomprehensible to him. Elena was different. Elena was furious. In the surviving footage, you can watch her interrupt the tribunal repeatedly, shout at the judges, refuse to answer questions. When asked about the deaths of protesters, she responds with what sounds like authentic outrage, not at the deaths, but at the implication that she bears any responsibility for them. What children? What mothers? What are you inventing? When a tribunal member asks whether she accepts the proceedings, she delivers what became one of the most remembered lines from that day. I am a mother to you. How can you do this? The tribunal convicted both of them. The sentence was death. They were taken to a courtyard. According to accounts from soldiers present that day, both insisted on being executed together. That request was granted. At 2:52 p.m. on December 25, 1989, Elena and Nicolae Ceausescu were shot by a volunteer firing squad. The bodies were briefly filmed. The footage was broadcast on Romanian television that same day, so the Romanian people could see, with their own eyes, that it was real. And that is when the questions began. The execution footage was grainy. The images broadcast afterward were brief, difficult to analyze, and produced under chaotic conditions. Almost immediately, theories began circulating. The most persistent: the bodies shown on television weren't actually the Ceausescus. The couple had escaped. The bodies were doubles, Securitate members, or other individuals sacrificed to create the appearance of execution, while the real dictators disappeared to safety somewhere beyond Romania's borders. These theories were fed by specific, concrete questions that didn't require conspiracy thinking to ask. Why did the trial last 2 hours? 2 hours to prosecute, convict, and sentence the couple who had governed Romania for 24 years, with no real opportunity for defense, no complete investigation of the charges, no process that would have met any recognized standard of legal fairness. Why was the execution footage edited so strangely? The surviving video had cuts and gaps. Who controlled what was recorded and what wasn't? And, most pointed of all, who exactly were the people who organized and ran this rushed proceeding? The National Salvation Council that took power immediately after the Ceausescus fall included numerous members who had themselves been part of the Romanian Communist Party. People who had operated within the regime. People who had their own reasons to ensure that Elena and Nicolae were silenced permanently before either could speak publicly about what they knew, who had done what, and who among the new leadership had been complicit in the crimes of the old one. A 2-hour execution was, from that perspective, extremely convenient for a significant number of people. The bodies were buried at Ghenci Cemetery in Bucharest. The graves were initially simple, without clear official identification markers. The absence of formal documentation fed further uncertainty, and for 21 years the question remained open. In 2005, Zoya Ceausescu, the couple's daughter, initiated legal proceedings to authorize the exhumation of her parents' remains for DNA identification. She didn't live to see the result. Zoya died of cancer in November 2006. Her husband Mircea and surviving son Valentin Ceausescu continued the legal case. After 5 years of judicial proceedings, the Romanian government authorized the exhumation July 2010. Ghenci Cemetery, Bucharest. Journalists from across Europe and beyond gathered at the cemetery as forensic specialists prepared to open the coffins. Romania paused, the world watched. What the specialists found inside both coffins was what 21 years of burial in damp European soil produces: skeletal remains in advanced decomposition, nothing visually identifiable in any meaningful sense, which was precisely why the DNA analysis was necessary. Forensic DNA extraction from remains this old focuses on material that preserves genetic information across long periods. teeth and dense bones like the femur. Samples were carefully collected from both coffins and sent for laboratory analysis. The reference samples for comparison came from Valentin Ceausescu and from Nicolae's brother. Weeks later, the results arrived. The DNA from Nicolae Ceausescu's coffin was confirmed as matching. Cross-referenced against both his son and his brother, the identification was clear and unambiguous. Elena's coffin produced a different result. The material collected from Elena's remains was insufficient for a conclusive laboratory determination. The DNA analysis of her remains could not produce a definitive scientific identification. But here is the detail that almost no reporting on this story includes. Despite the inconclusive DNA result for Elena, Valentin Ceausescu publicly declared that he was personally convinced both his parents were buried at Ghenci. One of the observers present at the exhumation reported recognizing the black winter coat Nicolae had been wearing at the time of his arrest, with bullet marks still visible in the fabric. The family accepted the results as confirmation for both. For Romania, officially, the chapter was closed. The Ceausescus were confirmed as buried at Ghenci cemetery. The bodies in those coffins were theirs. But the inconclusive DNA result for Elena left one thread permanently unresolved. Her identification rests on family testimony and circumstantial physical evidence, rather than the definitive scientific confirmation that established her husband's identity. That gap, small but permanent, is where the questions lie. Beyond the fake credentials in the coffin controversy, the documented record of who Elena Ceausescu actually was reveals something more disturbing than the propaganda myths about her. She was not simply a figurehead wife. She was not merely a symbol deployed by her husband's propaganda apparatus. She was a genuine power within the regime, and by consistent account, she exercised that power with a particular quality of cruelty that even people accustomed to operating within a brutal system found remarkable. Elena held formal positions of significant authority: member of the Political Executive Committee, Deputy Prime Minister of Romania. When Nicolae traveled internationally, Elena effectively governed. She made decisions. She issued orders. She shaped policy. And the manner in which she exercised that authority, according to accounts from former officials, diplomats, and party members who encountered her directly, was characterized by something beyond ordinary political ruthlessness. She humiliated ministers and scientists publicly in meetings. She made arbitrary decisions that destroyed careers based on personal caprice rather than political calculation. She interpreted any questioning, however subtle, however indirect, as personal betrayal requiring punishment. Under the regime she helped run, the Securitate conducted torture, forced disappearances, and pervasive surveillance that touched virtually every Romanian family in some way: forced labor, political imprisonment, deaths in detention, and the supreme irony, the regime's propaganda presented Elena Ceausescu as the symbol of women's elevated status in Romanian socialist society, a brilliant scientist, a caring national mother, an example of what women could achieve, while simultaneously implementing a forced natalist policy that criminalized abortion and contraception, designed to increase Romania's population, that resulted in thousands of women dying from unsafe illegal abortions, and that filled Romanian orphanages with children whose families could not care for them under conditions the regime had itself created. The images of those orphanages, revealed to international media after 1989, were among the most shocking disclosures of the post-communist transition. Overcrowded facilities, severe neglect, children who had spent their entire lives institutionalized under conditions incompatible with basic human development. This was Elena Ceausescu's legacy, not the scientific achievements that didn't exist, not the maternal warmth of the propaganda photographs, the orphanages, the Securitate files, the women who died in illegal clinics, the academics who spent careers maintaining a fraud under threat of imprisonment. The trauma of a regime like the Ceausescus doesn't resolve within a single generation. Romania is still working through it. Many Securitate agents who operated through the regime years simply continued their lives after 1989, with limited accountability. Some moved into positions in the new government structures that emerged from the revolution. The transition happened too quickly for comprehensive reckoning, and that incompleteness remains a source of bitterness for many Romanians today. The palace Nicolae Ceausescu ordered built in Bucharest. The Palace of the People, the second largest administrative building in the world after the Pentagon, still stands. It functions today as the seat of the Romanian parliament and a tourist destination. Approximately 57,000 families were displaced from their homes to clear the land for its construction. It has more than 100 rooms. 700 architects worked on the project while Romanian citizens stood in queues for bread. Ghensi's cemetery still receives visitors. Some come out of historical curiosity, others, and this detail continues to unsettle many Romanians, come to pay respects. Flowers appear on the graves of Elena and Nicolae Ceausescu on specific dates. The questions that the DNA analysis didn't fully resolve, about Elena's identification, about the rush trial, about who benefited from that speed, remain in the background of Romanian public life, not prominently, not constantly, but present and occasionally resurfacing when something brings the December 1989 events back into public discussion. Elena Ceausescu died in a military courtyard at 2:52 p.m. on Christmas Day 1989, reportedly still arguing with the soldiers who shot her until the moment the order was given. She had spent decades pretending to be something she wasn't, a scientist, a scholar, a mother of the nation, while exercising real power over a system that imprisoned hundreds of thousands, killed thousands more, and maintained its grip through one of the most comprehensive surveillance networks any European government has ever built. Her coffin sat in Ghensi Cemetery for 21 years before anyone opened it. When they finally did, the science confirmed her husband's identity with clarity and left hers with a permanent asterisk. The woman who had spent her entire public life surrounded by fabricated credentials and manufactured documentation ended her historical record with one final inconclusive result. Whether that's irony or justice depends entirely on how you look at it. What isn't in dispute is the reality of what she and her husband built and what it cost the Romanian people who lived inside it. These stories deserve to be told completely. Subscribe to Timelines of War. Share this video. Because the people who suffered under regimes like the Ceausescus deserve more than silence. And the history of how those regimes actually function deserves more than the sanitized version. We are not done. Timelines of War. Subscribe, notifications on, share this video,